Whether you're curious about sober-ish living or whether you are curious about your relationship with alcohol, this episode is for you. Tune in to learn the first few steps to try when you're curious about sober living, what makes it easier, and how to know when you are ready. Let's dive in.
What's up, sister? Welcome back to the Period Whisperer podcast, the show helping perimenopause and menopause women de-stress your body and decode what it's saying to you so you can own your own health, energy, and weight loss again. If you're new, I'm so happy you're here. I'm Bria. I'm your host, a recovering people pleaser and hustle addict turned functional and holistic hormone specialist. Let's lean in and learn what your body is saying to you.
Hey there, sister. Welcome to this expert interview with the amazing Courtney Andersen, who is a sober life coach. And you'll get to meet her in this interview, but I just wanted to pop in here first because I have talked a few times on this podcast with experts around sober living, and I've loved every one of them. Although I am not 100% sober, I recognize the impact of alcohol on my body, on my hormones, whether it's in occasions that I'm drinking or just more moderately, the way it can hold me back, the way it makes my perimenopause symptoms worse. So I'm constantly trying to learn more and share that information with you as I go on this journey too. In this expert guest interview, Courtney Andersen is a sober life coach, podcast host, and author. She's the founder of Sober Vibes and National Sober Day, and she really helps women quit drinking alcohol and thrive in sobriety in a simple, clear, empowered, growth mindset way. I think you're going to enjoy it. It's a general loving conversation where we're just talking about some of the challenges, and she's very candid. So enjoy meeting Courtney and let's get going. Hey there, sisters. Welcome back to the Period Whisperer podcast. And today is one of our extra special expert guest interviews. And we have the amazing Courtney Andersen here today, who is a sober life coach. And she's going to have some incredible insights for us, some great tips. So whether you are a drinker or a non-drinker, or you're just noticing some thoughts pop into your head here or there about your relationship to alcohol, I think you're going to find this episode really, really helpful. So welcome, Courtney. I'm so glad you're here.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me on, and I'm excited to chit chat with you.
Yes, that's what we said. We're like, let's make this conversational, like
yes,
talking about alcohol and what we're thinking about it, what we're feeling about it, and what we can do about it.
Right, exactly.
But why don't you tell us first how you became a sober life coach? I always think like hearing your story and why you made the decisions you did to get here is so interesting.
Yeah, so I became a sober life coach because I became sober myself. In 2012, I was about 6 weeks shy of turning 30, and that was when I decided to quit drinking for good. You know, it wasn't like this was something that okay, here's the thing. You don't wake up that morning and be like, this is going to be the last morning I drink, right? It just like, it happens. And for 4 years prior to that, I played a moderation game. I played the game of going back and forth, of putting rules on my drinking. Like, I'm not going to take any shots this weekend. You better eat, right? Because if you don't eat, there lies the problem. You know, not mixing cocktails. I'm only going to drink one day a week, right? Like, oh, okay, I'm going to take a couple weeks off. I did that dance for 4 years. So from 25 to 29, I did this dance. And at 25, why that started, how it became, it's because at 25, there was a night after drinking. I woke up and I was like, in my gut, my intuitive power that all of us ladies have of being like, there's going to be a day that I'm not going to drink alcohol. I don't know when it's going to happen. I don't know how, but there will be a day that I don't drink alcohol. Like, I am a person who should not touch alcohol, right? So then at 29, that was the case. So, you know, a lot of people always are like, how did you just quit drinking? I'm like, there was a 4-year process leading up to that. And for a lot of people who quit drinking, there is a unicorn, and it's like a top, not like less than 0.5%, like of people who, when they say they're going to quit drinking, they quit drinking, right? Mm-hmm. And then for the other many percentage of people who have problematic relationships with alcohol, it takes some time. So I just want to put that out there, because a lot of people are like, you just quit one day. And it was like, no, it was a 4-year process to leaning up. And I just want to let anybody know who is in that. A lot of time, these slips or these relapses, or you going back to it after a couple years of quitting, they're all lessons for you to learn how alcohol fits into your life. And eventually you will get to the point where you're like, I'm just better off without it. So I quit drinking. And then it was about 2016-ish. I then started creating Sober Vibes online. And then a couple years after that, I went into coaching. I didn't start coaching with this particular avenue until I was 6 years sober, because I took a lot of time to work on myself, work on codependency. And I wasn't ready yet to take on, that's a big responsibility. I do believe in a lot of the coaching field. It's a big responsibility to take on other people's, their vulnerabilities, and be consistent with it. You know what I mean? So I waited for quite some time to become a sober coach. So that's how it happened. It's all because I made the choice. And even when I created Sober Vibes, there was something lacking in the how do you get sober, right? Because a lot, it was like during that time, up until a couple years, it was like rehab or 12 steps, right? There wasn't really in between anything else. So for my case, I did some AA. I've done it all. I did therapy. I hired my own life coach, right? Like I've dabbled into it, personal development, because too, a lot when you quit drinking, it's not just about quitting drinking alcohol. You have to rebuild yourself back up. You have to dig deep on like, okay, well, why did you drink in the first place?
So why?
Yes. Yes. So that is how I became a sober life coach.
I love that. I love that you kind of explained the unicorn compared to maybe the rest of us
Yes.
beautiful horses out there.
Yes. Yes. Us stallions.
Yeah, right. It's such a relatable concept that we all seem to deny in all areas of our life, like in any
Yes.
type of healing or habit change.
Yes.
Yes, you're going to hear the lightning in the bottle story because that's flashy and sexy and easy to sell. But that's not what is most human experience. Most of it just, it is like it's fall down, learn, stand up, fall down, learn, stand up. And to eventually you're like, oh, I've learned enough now. No,
Yes.
no,
Yes. It's like burning your hand on the stove. It's like, how many times do you want to do that, right? Until you're just to the point where you're like, I'm good and tired. And a lot of people I know who have quit drinking alcohol, or women that I work with who have quit drinking alcohol, I can tell you the difference between somebody who is ready and somebody who's not. And it's all about one particular experience where how they talk about it. They're like, I got it. Or they talk about this in experience in such an impactful way of just like, I have had enough. Like I cannot continue to go on. And it's really all about the mindset. Quitting drinking alcohol and moving forward into a, I'm just gonna talk of alcohol-free life, okay? Is such a growth mindset that you have. And when I hear women talk about that growth mindset or hear anybody's story, it's like, okay, they're done with it because they're done learning the lesson. They're done. And that's anything in life.
Yeah.
You could be with the shit bag and you're like, okay, I'm good and tired after 10 years of being treated like this, right? And that is the same. When you get into, and I explain my relationship with alcohol, it is a relationship. You get into this toxic relationship because what it does happen, it becomes so habitual for so many, right? And then you get into this toxic relationship where this substance is almost like your best friend. And then once you're in that relationship, because a lot of people like to say, well, I don't have a physical dependency. I'm not drinking every day. I don't have like physical symptoms, but that doesn't matter. Majority of people, I will say, who are, because now this is a spectrum of alcohol use disorder. So you want to put in your gray area drinkers, you want to put your binge drinkers, you want to put your alcoholics, right? It is a spectrum of drinking. And in that spectrum, with however you identify, you have an emotional dependency on alcohol for sex, for going out with girlfriends, for dating, right? For
Relaxing.
vacationing,
Yeah.
relaxing. Yes, because, and that's like number one. Everybody, it's like, well, how am I going to relax? And
Yeah.
it's like, okay, but alcohol isn't really relaxing you if you look at the science behind
Yeah.
alcohol, right? So it's like this emotional dependency comes into play. And a lot of people do not talk about that because they want to brush off. And this is again sweeping things under the rug where it's like, but I'm not like this. Like we
Mhm.
have to stop justifying our relationship with alcohol, and in wherever you fall into it, it's like, okay, but you have this problem that you know is a problem,
Mhm.
and you have to stop justifying it.
I love that you say that because more and more for me, because I was telling you before we get on that, like I have gone, 100 days without drinking. I mean, I
Mhm,
had 2 children, so I went even longer without drinking then.
mhm.
I've definitely hit times where I'm like, I need a long break.
Yeah,
And then I for the most part, and anytime I'm like in a healing period, I'm always like,
yeah,
okay. But more and more I realize like I cannot perform at my best with this
yes.
relationship. And I think
Mhm,
what I was hearing from you there is like wherever you are at, look at yourself. There
yeah,
you are. It doesn't matter how much it might be acceptable out in the world or what is, defined by this person or this person. If you're awake in the night and you're feeling
mhm,
yucky, or the next
mhm,
day you have this anxiety and you're
mhm.
thinking, oh, I drank again. And they think this, even those 2 glasses of wine, that's your body talking to you
Yeah.
about it. And that's what we need to start leaning on, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to listen to what your intuitiveness is saying, and like, again, because and that's why the food relationship and
Mhm.
the alcohol, if a lot of women, eating disorders and the alcohol use disorders are like same, and there's a correlation between the two because a lot of it too is very similar, when you're talking about it from addiction standpoint. But like I was telling you with food, it's like even to when you eat something bad and then you feel bad the next day, it's like, okay, right, like you just kind of, what we were talking about for you, like give yourself grace. Like, yeah, if you're an occasional drinker, you're an occasional drinker and you don't have a problematic relationship with it. What is the problem? But if you're waking up the next day feeling like that, it's like, why do I keep putting this into my system?
Yeah.
For you're only getting 1 hour of fun time with it. If you think about what alcohol does into the body, and
Mhm.
it's like you drink, then you start to hit that peak of being like quote unquote hungover. That's why
Mhm.
you drink some more to feel better, right? And then the next day you have that huge aftermath.
Yeah. And I think it's not just one day anymore when you reach midlife,
Yes.
right? It's
Yes.
days, is how
Yes.
it goes.
Yes.
And I mean, like you said, there's the science that I think no
Mhm.
one can deny in the science, the impact of like the impact on the liver, therefore the cascade effect of that on your
Mhm.
hormones. So when we're talking
Yes.
about perimenopause and menopause, I think that's got to be super relevant. So there's no denying the science behind it. So then it kind of comes back to if we all know that the science says this is poison and
Mhm.
it hurts you, no matter
Mhm.
what, it hurts you.
Mhm.
Then it obviously it's coming back down to this normalization, this relationship to it in ourselves.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Because that's a lot of, well, and a lot of women, again, I can only speak for women,
Mhm.
because it's very different with men and women, because again, men don't have their cycles each month. Men don't have a second cycle. So I do believe quitting drinking alcohol is harder for women than it is men.
Mhm.
But in the process of this is it becomes a coping mechanism. I mean, alcohol becomes coping for so many women because it is so, again, accessible, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Especially to, I'm going to go take this back to, especially when women are moms, right? Where it's like, okay, I mean, when I had my little dictator a couple of years ago, I was sitting there at 3 a.m., couple months into him being alive, and I was like, my eyes twitching. And I was like, I had such empathy towards women at that point because I was like, I know why they drink.
Yeah.
I know why there's a thing called mommy wine culture.
Yeah.
I get it. You know what I mean? So alcohol becomes very accessible as a coping mechanism
Mhm.
for women just to turn the noise off,
Yeah. Yeah.
especially as we get later in life. And then as we get later in life, what you are seeing, and I'm sure you have seen it from what you're in, this is like, it's like an epidemic of women when you go through the perimenopause, menopause
Mhm.
phase of your life. Alcohol is only going to make it worse,
Mhm.
and it's going to be more of a problematic as you keep drinking it years down the road. Anytime I have a client who is like 35, 40, I'm like, you're quitting drinking at the right time.
Mm.
What you're about to go through.
Yeah.
Like, this is great to do this now. So then in 5 years, you can lessen and soften the blow of what's
Yeah.
about to happen to your body physically. And then for the women who are in their 50s who have gone through this, it was like wild drinking. It was hell for them.
Mhm.
And now they're like, I don't want to live like this anymore. Like,
Yeah.
I want this next chapter to not be one that is so defined by a relationship with alcohol.
Yeah. I want to go back to what you said around when you said it's different or it's harder for women
Yeah.
because of this infrating rhythm, this second rhythm that we carry. Can you
Yeah.
talk more a bit about that?
Well, yeah. So, and this is something that you and I talked about this book when you were on my podcast, but In the Flow. So that book opened my mind to everything.
Such a good book.
But so women, a lot of these studies are done for men, right? And even because I have coached men, just a handful before, and women, and it's just so different because there is a trigger that women tired, being tired, and
Mhm.
not feeling good is a trigger for women of why they continue to drink. A
Mm.
lot of women, when they're tired, they use alcohol as an upper. So,
Interesting.
especially too, if you have kids or that, after your 9 to 5 to get to your 5 to 9, right? To make it through, to cook the dinner, it's like, all right, or to clean the house, it's like, okay, let me get me a little pick me up. And they use that. So, around your period as well, when you're not feeling good, what is an easy suggestion for you? And what you're not understanding, and this is something I learned because it took me 6 years to have a child. So I had to really understand my body
Yeah.
and understood how my period, how I felt during the month. And I was only able to do that because I was sober too during that time. So it was like in the process, I was sober and I'm like, okay, now I understand why I have a little bit more anxiety before my period.
Mhm.
Now I understand why I have energy in a certain week and like why I want to like speed clean, right?
Yeah.
Like, why I want to get through all the best. Now I understand why ovulation, like why I'm crying, right? So like it wasn't like, oh, what is wrong with me? It's like, oh no, this is just a part of me. And this is the second cycle that we go through.
Mhm.
So in that, it's like women don't want to feel bad. So they want to drink themselves through it.
Mhm.
Men don't have to deal with this, right? Men aren't used to feeling like shit for 30 years on a monthly basis.
Yeah.
That's why when they get sick, it's like, oh my, are you okay? Like, do you need
The
to go to
man
the
cold.
ER?
Yeah.
Yes. Where you're just like, what happened? So it's a completely different experience for a woman trying to quit drinking or why women drink more. You know what I mean? And then plus two, there's this thing of this attitude for men. Plus, I worked in a bar for 20 years. I bartended. I understand the drinking culture and I understand this culture when there is a woman who is hammered and there's a man who is hammered and what that is talked about, how that is talked about differently, right? It's like, oh, that drunk bitch, oh, why'd she get so hammered? And the man, it's like, well, he was just having fun. It's
Uh-huh.
like, you know what I mean? So it's just like, I am a firm believer on how that alcohol is going to affect you, as probably where you are in your menstrual cycle as well.
Interesting.
Mhm.
That's true. What's
R-
going to come out at that point in time?
Exactly. And then, too, a lot of women that I used to wait on, too, it's like they were in the uh, um, menopause phase of their life, right? They're in that age bracket where it's like, well, of course, this is going to hit you harder later on in life. This is showing up how it's showing up, right? So I'm a big believer into how, men and women should recover totally separate. I don't agree with the intermingling in meetings and like, it's different. It's just
Yeah.
different. So,
That's so interesting. I want to go back to something else you were saying, or you touched on a little bit already, kind of coming to the root cause, because I think
mhm,
what we're saying is often it becomes difficult to let go of drinking because it has become a crutch or it has become a way
yes.
to feel better.
Mhm,
Um, and we know, I mean, I think what we know, just speaking to the women listening in perimenopause, like we know one of the main reasons we are struggling with symptoms in perimenopause is actually just the fact that it's another energy load on the body and we're already
mhm,
much at capacity. So
mhm,
most symptoms especially from 35 up to like 48, 49, when we actually have the hormones dip so low, most symptoms leading up to that have more to do with this energy supply and demand deficit.
yeah.
So you add a toxic load to the body that is
Mhm,
going to increase the demand and then not allow the body the space and bandwidth to be able to heal.
mhm.
So if we kind of understand that piece, then what are the things we're numbing, do you think?
Well, and this is a good one too. The thing, okay, but going back because of how you're talking about energy is how I help my clients get through the week. If you've listened to my podcast, my motto is protect your energy, right?
Yeah.
Because from Monday through Friday, we got to make it even. And I'm saying not to take on 101 things. People
Mhm.
are doing too much nowadays.
I agree.
People, human beings, even if you have to take your child to 25 basketball games in a week, that is too much.
Yeah.
And so the running around after you already did your 9 to 5 or insert whatever hours of the day you work, right? You
Mhm.
have energy that you have to give out in your job.
Yep.
Many women take on a role that is of a caretaker in whatever job it is. Usually it's one of a caretaker, a nurse,
Mhm.
lawyers, it's a very inner people pleasing role, right? Where there's a lot of yes to other people, HR.
Yeah.
It have to take on other people's energy and put out fires.
Yeah.
So when they get to the end of the week, a lot of people like, well, it's Friday. Let's become a weekend warrior. It's Friday. I deserve this. And
Mm.
at the end of the day, it's Friday and you were dead ass tired from
Yeah.
the week that you just went through of working 40 hours a week. And then whatever you do afterwards, whether you have kids or not, or that you put so much on your social calendar where in your sobriety, you actually learned that you were more of an introvert than an extrovert. So
Mm.
it's all about that energy balance, right? And then on the weekends, you're again overbooking yourself.
Mm.
You're saying yes to 3 different parties in one day. Go, go, go. That's a lot of energy out. And
Mhm.
then where are you gonna get that energy and re up your supply, right? And
Yeah.
a lot of women cope with this is relaxing.
Yeah.
Let me sit here and relax and have some wine or go through all of these parties drinking wine, right? Like this is helping me get through the next party I have to get to or dealing with my husband or
Yeah.
dealing with these kids, right? Like
Yeah.
so in that way it does become a coping mechanism.
For sure. The
Also,
calming of the mind in stillness. If we're
yes.
all like addicted to productivity in order to feel good about ourselves, when we
Mhm.
sit down, it's uncomfortable sitting there because everything else is still spinning around the brain. But I guess like having that drink will quiet that for us.
Yes, and it will numb out and it's like, okay, and then I have to go back to again, especially for people pleasers. Let's go back to your childhood. What
Mhm.
did you grow up in? And that's like the reality of the situation. And that is fine. You love your parents, whoever you like. I'm not knocking anybody's parents, but you grew up into a situation and around the age that we're at, if you came from a baby boomer, there is a lot of emotional neglect that you probably most likely faced because these baby boomers were raised by the greatest generation who were off fighting wars. It
Right.
is what it is. If you look at it like that, it's like, okay, I can see why my grandparents weren't there for my parents, but were there for me. It was almost like this was the generation that they could redo and show that love and whatnot, because again, Great Depression, wars. I mean, my grandfather served in like 3 wars. The man was in Pearl Harbor and lived. So it's a lot of like, okay, you are the product of your environment. So whatever role you took on, especially for, again, women who are people pleasers, then carried that. And then that was their way to cope. At some point, their way to cope just became to numb it all out because it became too much. And like not working on that stuff, it is very true. Your body will keep score and it will come out in some way if you do not deal with that type of trauma, because everybody has some trauma.
Yeah, for sure.
And there's a spectrum too of trauma and neglect and needs that were not met.
Yeah. So we want to definitely look at obviously our energy input and output through the week, which I love. I talk about this as well, very importantly. And we want to, because we got to reconcile that. Like, I think that's a really, and then we want to look to our childhood and kind of understand where some of this decision making might be coming from.
Yeah, but definitely that energy thing. Like and what I suggest to people, it's like you need to look at your schedule for the week. I am not telling you then to live inside such a routine, structured box, right? But like, instead of 3 birthday parties, let's dial it down to 1.
Yeah.
It's okay if you don't go to things. And I think in this day in 2025, we are okay with canceling plans. And I think we have the pandemic to thank for that, right? Like it's just an expectation now, like, okay, they canceled, no problem. Or, all right, they're sick, please stay away from me. Like, nobody wants to get sick anymore. So it's just one of those things that it's like, take that pressure off of you. But yes, even if it's just getting in an hour nap on the weekends to yourself, or just an hour to decompress, however that looks like for you. I'm sorry.
You're good.
That just like went out. Okay. Whatever that looks like to you, whether it's walk, right? You need to get into some decompression time for yourself.
Yeah. What do you say to someone, because I'm sure knowing that this is what you do, someone who's like, I don't know how to have fun. Like nothing feels fun without having drinks with my friends or a drink at the end of the day with my partner. Like what comes up for you as a coach when that's what you're hearing?
Well, again, this goes back to the growth mindset. And then I usually tell a person, it's like, okay, I totally hear you with the fun because drinking has become your fun. And this is going back to the emotional dependence, right? It's like you relied on that for your hobby because it becomes a hobby for so many people. It's even introduced into hobbies, like just sitting there, like those like sipping paints. It's like, can we just paint? Like, alcohol is it's so embedded into our society nowadays. That's another topic for another day, but like, so you really have to look at, it's like, okay, what is the definition of fun? First, those couple of months, yes, it's going to take you a couple of months. You have to take in consideration, like if you had this 20-year relationship with alcohol, just because you quit drinking one day, it does not mean that everything's going to be hunky-dory the next. It's same thing. If you're trying to either lose weight or gain weight, you have to start creating these habits, right? So you have to start replacing that old habit with something new. Right. So it's like, okay, anything for the most part you did in your drinking days, you can now do in your alcohol-free days. For me, those first couple months, I highly suggest for somebody to pick up some type of new activity just to keep their hands and mind busy, to take that focus off, especially on like, let's say a Friday. If Friday was a very big drinking day for them because it's an association, right? Like Friday was the day that I went all out.
Yeah.
And so now you have to start doing something new. In those first couple months when I got sober, I crafted things to keep my hands busy. I was not a crafter. My boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, came home and he was like, "What are you doing?" I was sitting on the couch and I was like, "I'm Googling hobbies," because I didn't have any besides working and drinking. That's all I knew. And no shame in having to Google hobbies. Yeah. So
I think everyone needs to Google hobbies for sure.
Yeah,
Like we
right.
are like short on hobbies these days.
Right. So I'm like, I had to do something that was completely different than the life that I was living. And a lot of my fun consisted of going out. So I had to sit my ass at home and I had to binge watch some wholesome TV at the time. Netflix was just starting to binge or do binging, right? And so I had to relearn what fun was.
Mm,
And so what I tell a client, it's like, well, what is your definition of fun?
mm,
And then it's usually, well, being around people, being around my husband or friends or whatnot, going out. I'm like, and you can still do that without drinking.
mhm.
Because in the society we have built up in what alcohol is, it's such a facade, right? Like alcohol is almost like that white picket fence. And now there is such a thing of like people think that they're not included because they're not drinking. And
Mhm.
it's like, well, no, you're still out participating with pals. You're still sitting there at the end of the night with your husband engaging. You're
Mhm.
talking. You're just not drinking alcohol.
Yeah.
So and then I often lead to the physical and emotional side of it where I'm like, are hangovers fun? Is being in that tug of war with your brain all the time, is that fun? Because that doesn't sound like a good time. What sounds like a good time nowadays is waking up present and not being so tied down to a substance that actually dictates more of your life than you think. And that is only something that you really learn and see after you have a couple months of sobriety.
Yeah. Couple months.
Couple months. And I say that it's different for everybody because it's an experience everybody goes through. Um, but it does take some time because it's a big lifestyle change.
Yeah.
Not all of your friends are going to come with you because
Mm,
not all of your friends are, but not everybody understands like, well, why do you want to better yourself? How
mhm.
I look at that, like if you want to better yourself, quit drinking alcohol and see what happens. Just
Yeah.
see what if you have a problem with it.
Yeah, and I love that you say that because I think we have gotten for the same reason we should be googling hobbies, like
Yeah.
we have become so busy that we have gotten away from self-experimentation and of like
Yes.
let me just try this
Hmm.
for a large enough sample size and determine
Yes.
is it for me or not? Do
Yeah.
we had this kind of dictated on us in school. I feel like when we're younger, it's like, okay, well, you're going to try this class, you take this course, and maybe you'll join this team and you'll see how it is for the season.
Hmm.
And if you don't like it, you won't do it again. And if you like it, you will do it again. It's
Yeah.
we don't haven't built that into our lives. Well, many of us haven't, some do. And I do find the ones who have hobbies, who have that growth mindset, they seem to thrive a little bit better in their health and in all areas of life. But it's a really interesting point. It's like if you're even here listening to this episode,
Hmm.
still, it
Hmm.
probably means it's time for you to do a little experiment, right? Like do a little experiment. Let's check it out.
Right. And I can guarantee you that there's probably a few listening who've been in this dance with
Mhm.
alcohol for a long time and is like, I, this is talking to me and I can't, why can't I quit? Like I'm because so many people are so quiet about this because even though if you were in a social media bubble of like sobriety and recovery and living out loud, because that's what I chose to do in 2012, I had to live the complete opposite of what I did for so long. And for some people, it's very looked down upon to be speaking out loud about this.
Mm.
But that was my healing path, and it's helped me and it's been best for me. This is such a personal decision, but so many people suffer silently because it's alcoholism is so shamed upon.
Yeah.
If perfect example. If I was to go over to my family's house, I'm just saying hypothetically, right? If I were to go over there, because this can happen, and I've seen it happen, where if I started drinking, nobody would say anything to me. But if I went over there, friend's house or whatnot, and I started shooting up heroin,
Mm.
snorting cocaine,
Mhm.
smoking crystal meth, took out a packet of Oxycontin and was like, let's party, people would have something to say.
That's a big party you're throwing out
Do
there.
you know what I mean? But
I know
because
exactly.
of that is how like alcohol is looked on. So it's and so when you have to admit that you have a drinking problem and people are like, "No, you don't seem like you have a drinking problem," because there is still this ideal of a drinking problem only consists of a man or a woman living under a bridge, shaking, a cup full of change, and that is what alcoholism looks like.
Right. Right.
Do you know what I mean? And it's not, it wasn't me. It wasn't, you know, uh, a nurse, office manager, a doctor, a lawyer. Like, how can you have a drinking problem? You have it all together. And that is where, because it's very easy to become a high functioning drinker. There's
Right.
so many layers to this topic,
Of course. No, of
you know,
course.
of
And I
what
love
it goes down to. But
that.
yeah,
No, that's great. You've given us so much, I think, and just hearing you talk about it. I think one of the most important things is just opening up this conversation, cracking it open,
yes.
and just reminding people to like, hey, listen to your heart a little, listen to your brain in the middle of the night. If the brain in the middle of the night is being like, ugh, like, okay, let's do this experiment. Let's do the experiment for a little while and then decide for yourself what feels right for you. Um,
Mhm.
but what are your thoughts on how important it is to the success of a soberish experiment, we'll call it, to have like your partner on board?
So it's very funny because a lot of the women I have worked with,
Mhm.
their partners are the type where they're quote unquote normies.
Normies.
Yeah, of where it's just like, I can have one and then not drink again for a couple months. Like where it's very much just a casual drinker
Okay.
of just like few and far between, right? I do think though it is important to have your partner on board, even if it's just your partner not having alcohol in the house for you for a while.
Got it.
I think that is a choice of being respectful with one another in a relationship, and you have to really go with who the person is quitting drinking and what you feel comfortable around.
Mhm.
I have one woman I'm working with, and she had asked her husband, was like, can you just not drink Sauvignon Blanc in front of me? Like, please don't crack any bottles. And he was like, sure, no problem. And I think that's something, a lot of this is like what we put into our head. But I just think that understanding what your boundaries are with it, and then asking your significant other what they will do to help you. So,
Yeah.
because listen, there's partners out there who don't give enough. So like, it's hard to say that, but I just think that it's the boundaries. And I definitely think that nobody should have alcohol in their house, especially for those first 30 days. Why
Okay.
tempt yourself?
Yeah.
Again, it's the same thing. If you're trying to lose weight or whatever avenue in that, it's like, why have that temptation around you?
Make it easy on yourself.
Make it easy on yourself.
Mhm.
So,
Okay. This has been amazing. I know we've covered a lot of few things, but if you could give kind of like, here are your first few steps if you are starting to think about this.
mhm.
Um, can you give us a few key steps of like, here's what you would recommend doing first, or yeah, thinking about?
Yeah. So I always say this is my disclaimer because I don't know where people are at with their drinking, and many people with problematic relationships will lie about how much they drink. So please talk with the doctor about quitting drinking alcohol, because there is detox, yeah, from alcohol. So, you could be drinking a couple bottles of wine a day and you will go into somewhat of detox. I'm not trying to say that to scare anybody, but talk with your doctor, because you need to. People have detox from alcohol and have actually passed away. So that is how strong alcohol and dangerous it is on your system. Uh, besides that, besides that big disclaimer, you can start off by just, after talking with the doctor, knowing what's good for you. You just need to start off at day one and focus on not drinking. We are not going to future trip from a year down the road. If you start having those thoughts, shake your head and tell yourself to shut the F up and like just focus on today. get to bed that day, because it's very, very easy for people to future trip. You're then going to wake up the next day and you're going to do the same thing over again, right? Future thoughts, tell yourself, stop. You were just focusing on today. The one day at a time really is true for this. Then when you're in this process, then you're going to go through your house too. And if there's alcohol, get it out of your house, dump it down the sink. I don't give it to your neighbor. Like, you don't need to hold on to it for the possibility of your brother and him not, you might be thinking, well, my brother and his fiance might come over here in a couple months. Meanwhile, your brother's not even dating anybody. So like, just get rid of the alcohol in your house. If you live with somebody who drinks, have that conversation. What's a boundary for you? Have them even too, then hide it. Put it in the garage, out of sight, out of mind, right? And then in this process of time, you're going to find some type of help, whether that is a therapy, whether that is 12 steps, whether that is a sober coach, whether that is an online supportive community. You need to be around people who understand what this road is, and people who can understand and lift you up and be like, congratulations on another day. Because people who are not in the same avenue, circle of what you're going through right now, don't understand how hard it is just sometimes not to drink alcohol.
Yeah.
So you need that supportive community. So those would be the start small and start off like that. And then in time, you will expand and grow, and like it will get easier. But just those are my three main tips.
Those are amazing tips. And I think I'm always a huge fan. I know. And I think they're all very, especially like the support piece. I think there's some options there. I love working with coaches because I find you get so much more in depth in that process. And so I want you to share how we can come find you if we want to learn about this. But before one last thing, why don't you give sort of the highlights on some of the wins that you have noticed, some of the wins that maybe your clients have noticed when they kind of move through those first few months?
Oh my God, those first few months, I will say this. It was around 90 days for me in particular, right? And it was like, but this is going back to that fun piece. And Matt and I went and we grabbed a coffee and sat in this town and on a park bench. And it was a Friday night. And I was looking around, nice, beautiful, springish day. No, it was in the fall time. Sorry, fall time. And I was like, oh, okay, I can do this. It wasn't until like really truly 90 day of like that social aspect, and I was like, oh, I can do this. And I was like, is this what normal people do on a Friday? They just chill. Just getting drunk, right? And drinking coffee and just like taking it in. There was a moment of peace at 90 days for me. And that's why I just tell people to like get through those 90 days, because again, your body is detoxing. There is a process there. You've got to level out. You have to get your nervous system back to ground zero. So a lot of wins. So that was a huge moment for me of like, okay, I can do this. I can move forward with it. A lot of my clients, I have one client who's still sober today that I still chat with, and she's like, I still take away that energy part. I still protect my energy. And she was like, that was something I wasn't doing in my drinking days. For a lot of women, it's about regaining self-confidence in themselves and their self-esteem. I just had this one I finished with, and there was a guy who actually called her who was a random hookup. And he called her and she was like, no, thank you. And this was at like 70 days sober, but she was like, and I said, do you think if you were to still be drinking, you would have said yes to that? She's like, absolutely. And she's like, and the last experience was god awful. And she was like, and I was like, but this is what I'm talking. You're making better decisions for yourself because your judgment isn't all clouded, or you don't have that like response of just saying yes because you were under the influence, right? I'm like, so that's a huge win. So, I mean, it's a lot with self-esteem and self-respect that gets built back into a person within time. And I mean, I had zero of that. I mean, at that point, even in my active addiction, there was a couple times where I wanted to die. And so for me in sobriety, this really is about a chance of for me, this is living life. and this is how I should be living life. And everything that I have wanted in my life has been because I made that one decision in 2012 to quit drinking alcohol.
Wow.
And I stand on that.
I love that. I love that. I think that with the self-esteem piece, it's also about like just leveling up what you think you deserve. You're not seeing yourself differently. So
and you're able to listen to your intuition better, right? And you probably hear of stories of people getting sober and, realizing like, okay, realizing things in their life where it was like, oh, I haven't been listening to this. So now I'm going to listen to it and act upon it because this is who I was from the beginning. Yeah. So, it's a beautiful thing of what happens to people when they let go of a substance that was holding them back for so long.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you so much, Courtney. This has been incredible. If anyone is interested in learning more about you, about the inspiration you provide on Instagram, about even being coached by you, where do they find you?
Yeah, you can go to my website. It's CourtneyRecovered.com, or you can listen to the Sober Vibes podcast, or you can even get my book off of Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and it is Sober Vibes, A Guide to Thriving in Your First 3 Months Without Alcohol. So that takes you through those first 3 months. And from a coaching perspective, there's journal prompts in there, all of that. So
that's amazing. Thank you so much. That's amazing.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I will put all of this in the show notes. And I feel like after today, now you have even more amazing tools to go out and be more in your life and not just less on a scale.
Yes.
So thank you. And we'll catch you in the next episode.
Thank you so much for joining me on the Period Whisperer podcast. If you liked this episode, take 30 seconds right now to write a review on iTunes and then reach out to me directly on Instagram at Bria_period_whisperer and message me there with a screenshot of your review. As a thank you, I will give you a customized free hormone audit to get you on your way to the best health of your life in midlife.